Right. What do you think, Missy? You want to go ahead and get started? I know people will still be finishing up with school and things and joining, but
That's fine. I'm ready when you guys are.
all right, go ahead.
All right. So, hello. How are you? Is everyone doing well today? Doing good. Probably just getting out of school, getting out of uh probably a long day. I know it's a Monday, so I appreciate you guys hanging with me for the next hour and a half to talk about a topic that's really important to me. It's something I'm very passionate about, but it's also something that's a very personal topic for me as well. And I hope that by the end of our time, you're able to take away information, maybe some new information, maybe some new ways to see information that you've seen before. But I hope that throughout this series that we're doing through C2S2, that you guys will be able to gain quite a bit. So before I go any further, I want to give Beth a little bit of time just to talk about the funders.
Yeah, I know we have a lot of familiar faces and familiar names on this meeting, so some of you have heard me go over this many times before, but yeah, my name's Beth Ash. I work at Bowling Green State University, and we have a grant through the U.S. Department of Justice that lets us provide these trainings and programs that many of you have participated in. And the overall goal of the grant is to prevent school violence. And so we're taking the perspective of addressing mental health and well-being and providing trainings like this one. So thank you for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. As I said, I think that this series will be informative. Plus, I think that it will give you some tools that you can use in the real world. So, my name is Missy McClain. I'm from Akron Children's Hospital, and I've been at Akron Children's Hospital. I'm just about to slide into my 20th year. So, it's been pretty fun that I've been able to be at the same job for such a long time and that I was given the opportunity to do this job that's very unique. I'm the only person who's ever had my job. And what this job has given me is an opportunity to travel all over the state of Ohio and go into classrooms and cafeterias and offices in high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, preschools, daycares, other types of youth serving agencies, and really just see broad spectrum what types of issues young kids are experiencing, what types of behaviors we might be seeing in those spaces, and what some educators and other professionals and other adults who care about these kiddos are doing so that they can best create the best possible environments for these kids to survive. So I think sometimes people will say, "Oh, well, Missy, she's the expert on trauma." Honestly, I'm not the expert. I feel like you guys are the experts tenfold. I just have this really quirky job where I get to go around and meet folks just like you that are doing the work that you're doing every single day and then share it with others. So with that in mind, here is my email address if you're interested in uh, anything, if you have any questions or you need anything from me, that's going to be the best way to get a hold of me. I also have here my Pinterest account. My Pinterest account is, it's just Pinterest. So if you're a Pinteresty person, but I have over 5,275 different support strategies, activities, all types of things, all social and emotional learning related, pre-K through 12th grade and beyond. So, if you're looking for an activity to enhance emotional literacy, right? You can head on over to my Pinterest. I have a whole board on emotional literacy with a couple of hundred different ways that you could talk about that with a variety of different age groups. So I encourage you to check that out if you are a Pinteresty person. I think of this as like my student resource. So if I'm trying to find something for students, I would go to this Pinterest. And if I'm trying to find something for myself as a professional, I would go into my Live Binder. And my Live Binder link here is this is a pretty robust resource. It has every PowerPoint slide I've almost ever made on there. It has a ton of direct links to academic research, direct links to websites that I'm going to talk about, recommended podcasts and webinars and books, and just a whole bunch of other stuff to continue your learning in the process. of doing this work day in and day out. So I know that Beth has been kind to add these contact information into the chat. So for those of you who don't want to like sit and type those many numbers out, I know I could have made it like a nicer website, but I don't want to pay for anything, right? We'll go free. Oh, speaking of not paying for anything, on my live binder, there are things that are copyrighted. None of the copyrights belong to me, so I don't really care about if you like take it, but don't take it and sell it. You know what to do. Use this for fair use. All right. So, this is my family. My husband Scott and I have been together since 2004, and I'm just really lucky because he is not at all involved in education or in any type of social service, and that's super nice because I think it's nice to kind of at dinner time like relax into like the stress of garage door springs because he works for a garage door company, right? I think there would be a lot of pros to having a partner that knew and understood the work that I was doing, but there are a lot of pros to having someone to just kind of take your mind off of it too. So I appreciate that in him. My daughter Bree here, she is she'll be 15 in December, so we're getting close. This year, for Halloween, she did her very first couples costume with her boyfriend. So this has been fun. My son there, he will be 13 in January. So he's in seventh grade. My daughter's in ninth. My seventh grade son this year for Halloween, he went in a group. He went as a South Park character. So yeah, we love Halloween here. Hope you guys are having a good spooky season. So like I said, I want to introduce my family because I talk about my family a lot. I talk about myself a lot and in the experiences that I've had throughout my life, not just professionally, but personally as well. And as I said, trauma is this thing I'm incredibly passionate about. I really feel like it is something that every human being should know and that every human being needs more information on, including me. I am learning new things about trauma every day. And I think that the more we understand how our experiences impact our lives, the better we are to be able to serve others and serve ourselves. So, this very personal thing for me is kind of wild because I think sometimes, I don't know, like trauma's kind of popular, like to talk about now where it's all over TikTok and I see like t-shirts that say like, "Oh, I'm funny because of my trauma" or whatever. Like it's kind of getting into the mainstream conversation, which is good. I like, that people are learning about trauma and what it is. Couple of setbacks on that though is I worry sometimes that it kind of sections off people, right? Or kids in our minds of like, well, those kids have experienced trauma. Like it's a blanket that covers over them. Like it can be explained in one way, or like it can be managed or intervened in one certain way. And it's so much different than that. Like trauma is so incredibly unique to every individual who experiences it, literally every individual who experiences it. And so I think that when I think about trauma, instead of thinking about it like that blanket that covers over children, I actually like to think about that trauma as a brick wall, right? That there's this brick wall that stands between me and the child. And that brick wall, it just gets in the way. It gets in the way of building relationships. It gets in the way of that child's learning. It can get in the way of that child connecting with peers or adults. It just gets in the way, right? And to think of it as a brick wall helps me understand that every kid's going to be different, right? It's very unlikely that you're going to be working with just one child who's experienced trauma. Most of you are probably working with many children who have experienced trauma. And when I think of that brick wall, it helps me understand the difference, right? Because one child I might be working with might have a brick wall that's 5 feet tall, and another child might have a brick wall that's 15 feet tall. well, that's going to make a difference. And there's going to need to be different types of interventions and different types of connection with that child that will that will help them be the best they can be, right? So that brick wall helps me in that way. It also helps me understand the ever evolving nature of trauma, because I think we kind of again get locked in this idea that we're working with kids who have experienced trauma. That's not quite right, because what we're working with is kids who are experiencing trauma. It is a current circumstance for them. It is a current place where they live and breathe and come to school every day within this framework of trauma. And so it changes for them all the time. So I don't know if you've ever had this happen where you were feeling connected with a kid and you were like, it's a Friday and you're like, man, I feel great. I feel like we finally bonded. We've got a couple of things we have in common. He's finally talking to me. I finally feel like I have a couple of strategies that help me help him, right? And you feel really good on Friday. And then you come back Monday and stuff feels different. It doesn't quite feel the same. And you're like, oh, wait. And I find that in those situations, I tend to first go into like self-doubt, right? Where I'm like, well, maybe I misinterpreted our relationship. Maybe I thought we were closer than we were. Maybe I thought these strategies were working and they weren't. Then I move into strategy doubt, where I'll say, well, maybe this strategy didn't work. Maybe this is not a good strategy. Maybe I need more strategies. And then sometimes I know we even go into that space of student doubt. I don't know that he can do this, right? That maybe we don't have the right amount of supports for this child. So the one thing we don't usually go to in those moments is just what happened over the weekend, because something changed. And it could be that that child who was, had a brick wall of 5 feet tall on Friday, something happened over the weekend, and now that child's wall has grown to 15 feet tall. That is going to change things. It doesn't make you any less relationally close with that child. You still have some connections with that child. It doesn't mean that those strategies didn't work then, because they did. It just means that we need to change and be flexible with students who have experienced trauma. And that's, to me, one of the hardest parts of this work, because I don't know if any of you guys, I can be a little bit of a type A person and be, like, this is the plan, this is the thing we're gonna do, right? And, uh, and when we're working with kiddos who've experienced trauma, we have to be a lot more flexible than that. And if I expect the same tool to work all the time, it's gonna set me up for some pretty big frustration. So I like thinking of that brick wall again as this thing that gets in the way. It helps me understand the differences between young people, and it also helps me understand that ever evolving nature of trauma. And then the last thing I like to think about with that brick wall is really what makes up those individual bricks, right? How those individual bricks build and strengthen and solidify over time. So what those bricks actually are is stress. So how many of you have ever experienced stress before? Yeah. This is like a normal everyday. Of course, we experience stress. Yes, everyone experiences stress every single day of their lives, right? And this stress it kind of waxes and wanes. And so the way I like to think about my stress is I like to think about stress that lives on like a stove dial, right? And that depending on what number of that stove dial I'm currently at, I can kind of gauge how well I'm going to be able to function and behave in that moment, right? Each and every one of us experience stress all the time. So I'm going to ask you guys right now, how many of you guys are experiencing maybe like that 1 to 3 zone, feeling good, cozy in a 1 to 3? No, no, no. All right. Well, maybe some of us are getting there. Maybe at 5:30 we'll move into that 3, right? Um, anybody in like a 4 to 7 zone with me? Yeah, I tend to be in like a 5, 6 right now. For me, this is a good spot to be. Anybody in that 8 to 10 zone? You don't have to raise your hand, it's okay, right? We have all been there, and we will all be back there, unfortunately. We can't stop ourselves sometimes from getting to that 8 to 10 zone. It just comes up on us and surprises us sometimes. And this stress, that we experience, it does impact our everyday experience, and it does linger throughout our days and throughout our weeks and even years. And so when I think about this stress, again, as I said, it helps me better understand how I'm going to be able to behave and function. So this is for me personally. Yours might be a little bit different than this, but this is just how I kind of view it in my own self. That for me, when I'm in like a 1 to 3 zone, I'm actually not gonna be performing very well. Like, a 1 to 3 zone for me is, like, super lazy, I'm paying my kids to which is the first one that's gonna find my phone, like that kinda space where I've had it, and I'm just gonna chill in a 1 to 3 zone for a while. So I don't really function very great, at that, 1 to 3 level. And, for me, though, a peak point for me is about a 4 or 5. A 4 or 5 is really kind of like just enough pressure on. You're right, like, I have work to do, I'm awake, I'm moving, I'm grooving, that kind of 4 to 5 zone is good for me. But then I'll tell you, man, the closer I get to that 10, the less I'm able to function and behave like a human being, right? I'm sure you guys have been there before too. How many of you have ever been in that 8 to 10 zone and you completely forgot something that was super important? Me too, right? Me too. How many of you guys have ever been in that 8 to 10 zone and you made a huge mistake on something that you really know how to do very well? Yeah, me too, right? We've done this. How many of you guys have been in that 8 to 10 zone and you've said or done something that you later regretted? Thanks. Me too. This is what we do, right? This is what we do when we get to that 8 to 10 high level stress zone. And I find it interesting that as adults, I do this all the time too. Like when I get in that 8 to 10 zone and I make that mistake, right? I go straight into like justification, right? Where I'll say things like, well, I forgot that paper because I've just got so much on my plate right now. If I didn't have to do this and this and this and this, maybe I could get it done. Right? Or sometimes I'll even go into, like, blaming others immediately, right? And I'm like, "If I could get any help from anyone around here," right? That's what happens when we get into that 8 to 10 zone. We stop functioning very well, and we stop behaving very well. So, when I think about this, it's interesting because, kids live on this spectrum too. They live on this stove dial every day of their lives, and they will wax and wane throughout the day and feel good and feel more stressed, and some may feel more stressed than others. And uh, but the same thing happens to them in that 8 to 10 zone, right? And we don't always, as adults, connect their stress to the mistake that's happening right in front of us, right? Where when it's ourselves, we say, oh, well, it's because I'm stressed that I forgot this paper, right? But when we think about kiddos, if they forgot their homework, we might be having a conversation about things like responsibility or accountability, right? Not really recognizing that their experience and their forgetting of this homework, it may not be a personal trait that needs improving. It might be a symptom of external stress. And so, how can we have that conversation differently? I don't ever think, that we need to change our expectations or boundaries, right? Hey, I needed the homework today, but I could change the way that I communicate with that child, right? Like, man, I really needed the homework today, but I could tell you're having a crazy morning. What's going on? Right? That relational connection is going to just quadruple the chances that that homework's going to come in tomorrow, way more so than the conversation about responsibility and accountability, right? Just relating to kids and understanding that, hey, we know what it's like to experience that 8 to 10 stress zone, and that it can make us mess up and do things that we later regret. And so when we think about this stress and how it builds over time, it really is a physiological experience. So I'm making the assumption that most of us have a pretty good understanding of our stress response system. I am going to go through it just so that we're all using the same language when it comes to our stress response system. This is what happens to your body when you experience that stress, right? So the very first thing that happens is that you have a perceived danger or a real danger. So to your brain, it actually doesn't matter if you are in the car accident on the highway or in the traffic behind it. Your brain actually goes into this same survival system. Now, being in the car accident and what people call compounding stressors, like my car's wrecked, I'm hurt, someone else is hurt, I'm definitely not getting to work. That will make this feel worse if you're in the car accident versus in the traffic. But it's the same system regardless, right? So, real or perceived danger. And that's followed by a biochemical hormonal response. I think a lot of people, you guys have probably heard of adrenaline and cortisol, right? They call those our stress hormones. And those things are super active when we are experiencing stress. However, this actually is a huge upheaval of our whole entire system. It is 1,600 different combinations of chemicals and hormones that are activated in this time. So that is why this feels so terrible, because it literally pulls our whole body out of whack in those moments. And then what we're supposed to, or I'm sorry, then we go to fight, flight, or freeze. There's a new one added on here, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. They talk about fawn being like a people pleasing space of kind of going along to get along feeling, even when there's stress or perceived danger for yourself. So then what's supposed to happen is that we are supposed to then get to this space of homeostasis, which really is just a time to just take a nice big deep breath and just get back to baseline. Let's try that together. Let's take a nice big deep breath in and out. Right? Welcome to homeostasis. Like, it's not fancy. It's just getting back to baseline. That's all. The hard part about this, though, is that many of us as adults and many, many kids, we are faced with so many perceived dangers in our day that we're just skipping right on over homeostasis. And we're just getting stuck in this red zone over and over and over and over again, right? And I think you've probably seen this before. Maybe a kid just, I don't know, just got rushed out of their house. Mom's throwing a waffle at their head on the way out. They get on the bus and again, they're supposed to get this opportunity to take this nice big deep breath on the bus, but right when they get on the bus, someone starts teasing them and they go up and they're back around, right? And they get off the bus and again, supposed to have this chance to take a nice big deep breath, but there's one of us saying, "All right, let's go, let's go, let's go. Come on, bell's gonna ring. Let's go, let's go." Right? And they're up and they're back around. And then they get to their locker, their cubby, and they realize they forgot their homework and they're up and they're back around and all day long. They're up and they're back around all day long, right? This is when stress becomes pretty dangerous for us, for our bodies and for our brains. Something that is important to know about people who have experienced trauma is that sometimes, particularly people who have experienced trauma between the ages of 0 to 3 years old, so that very, very beginning brain development, so 0 conception to 3 years old, if I experience either high levels of stress hormones from my mom or traumatic experience myself, something can happen where I actually get pre-wired into this red zone in a way that I don't know how to get to the green zone, that my baseline is an 8. I don't know how to get to that green zone. Now, they don't know how to get to that green zone, like in the same way that I don't know how to fix the transmission in your car. I don't know how to fix the transmission in your car, right? I might be able to pretend for a second, walk down to your car, figure out how to open your hood, figure out where that like metal thing is that's gonna like keep the hood up. I'm gonna be like, ooh, that looks serious. I don't know how to fix the transmission in your car, right? That's the same thing that these kids are experiencing. They might know how to pretend to calm down. they might think, oh, well, this is what she means when she says calm down, right? My hands are supposed to look like this. My face is supposed to look like this. That's what calm down is. But they don't actually know how to calm down. Um, and what's wonderful about us, though, as human beings, is that we have the capacity to learn. That's the best part of our brains, right? That we have the capacity to learn. And kids can learn how to get into this green zone, but it's going to take a lot of stuff, right? Just like I could learn starting today, if I so wished, I could learn how to fix the transmission in your car. Okay, what would that take, right? I mean, it's gonna take some type of teacher, leader, mentor, someone, right? It's gonna take some type of, like, formal learning, so maybe like a book or like a book. Aw, that's sad. Like, some sort of program that will help me learn transmissions, right? I'm gonna need informal learning. I'm gonna be watching YouTube videos and listening to podcasts and right? I'm gonna do all that stuff. I'm gonna need permission to fail, right? All of that, like I do, you do, we do stuff with my teacher so that I can fail in a safe space where then I can learn how to do it correctly. And then I'm just going to need tons and tons and tons of tools. I'm going to need tons and tons of time, and I'm going to need tons and tons of practice before you feel like I could successfully fix the transmission in your car, right? You would never, at least I hope you would never, let me anywhere near your car if I said, "Oh, yeah, I know how to fix transmissions. I watched that one YouTube video about it." You would know right away, "Oh, she don't know how to fix transmissions," right? But sometimes we think that social and emotional learning skills are going to be somehow easier to learn than other things, but they take the exact same amount of work, effort, and energy. So I've heard lots of teachers say things like, "Well, no, he knows how to calm down. We watched that Go Noodle video about it. No, they know how to calm down. We watched that YouTube video about it." And yeah, those are great pieces to that informal education of getting to that space where I can calm down, but it's not going to be the thing that works and helps them be successful at calming down. It's going to be the everyday, frequent practice, support, and cheerleading from us so that they can build that skill over time, right? I mean, I would think for a transmission, it would take me at least a year to feel even decently confident in fixing transmissions, right? We need to kind of think that same way about social and emotional learning. So, as I said, if we get stuck in this red zone over and over and over again, this is when it can become dangerous for our brains and for our bodies. So, this is the most sciencey page I'm going to show you. I won't get any more sciencey than this. But I just think it's interesting to know about how our brain reacts to stress. So when we experience stress, our brain is, to simplify, it's basically functioning out of three main brain parts. And those brain parts are the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus. So I like to think of those three parts as people because to personify them helps me understand how they work when it all goes down. So, I'll tell you kind of how I think about them so that you can imagine with me this crazy little band of troopers I have in my brain. So, let's say that I get into traffic on the way to work, right? That is a perceived danger. The very first part of my brain that comes into action is my amygdala. So, I like to think of my amygdala as like a uniform, like first responder, toot, 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 toot. And her whole job is just to say danger. That's it. So my brain sees the red brake lights of traffic up ahead, and my amygdala pulls that whistle out and says, toot, 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 there's danger. And then that signals over to my hypothalamus. So I like to think of my hypothalamus as a personal trainer at the gym, right? And the reason I imagine her this way is I imagine her this way because she's in charge of like sending signals down to my adrenal glands to shoot out that cortisol and adrenaline. It's her job to raise my respiratory rate and to raise my heart rate. Really, it's her job to rev my body up to a 10 just in case I need to run or fight something. right? So my brain sees the red brake lights of traffic up ahead, and my hippocampus says, toot, 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 there's danger. And my hypothalamus says, all right, Missy, let's get that body ready. Cortisol go, adrenaline go, breathing, heart rate go, go, go. Right? Gets my body revved up to a 10 just in case I got to run or fight. Then that signals over to my hippocampus. So I like to imagine my hippocampus as a secretary, and I imagine that she has this like giant filing cabinet, and that when she opens it, it's like just like the biggest filing cabinet you could ever imagine. And it is jam stuff with files, right? So the reason I imagine her this way is because it's my hippocampus's job to store all of my memories that have emotional components. So, say you drive all the way to work and nothing particularly new or interesting happens to you. That does not get stored here. Weirdly, it does get stored, but not here. This filing cabinet, this one is for all the times someone made you laugh, all the times someone made you cry, the times you felt nervous, overwhelmed, excited. All of those emotional based memories create files inside this filing cabinet. And what she does with that information is she actually helps guide my response today, that fight, flight, or freeze response today, based on past experience. So she guides my actions today based on past experience. So my brain sees the red brake lights of traffic up ahead, and my amygdala says, toot, 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 there's danger. And my hypothalamus says, all right, Missy, let's get that body ready. And my hippocampus says, okay, and opens up that filing cabinet. Actually, the last time you got stuck in traffic, you actually got off on this exit and you made it to work on time. You should do that. Right? It guides my fight, flight, or freeze response today based on past experience. So this process is lightning fast, like lightning fast. It has to be lightning fast. It has to be lightning fast to save our lives, right? I think sometimes stress gets such a bad name. It's always, oh, how stress is killing you today. I mean, it is actively killing all of us. However, it is also actively saving our lives every day, right? It's constantly being that hero that saves our lives, and it has to be a fast process for it to save our lives, right? Uh, this is the system that goes into action when we slam on the brakes if someone cuts us off on the highway. This is the action that goes into play when we grab the banister as we're falling down the stairs, right? It has to happen very, very quickly. So because it happens so quickly, because it's so fast, we very rarely process it. So it's not like we're about to fall down the stairs and we think, well, I should probably grab onto the banister, right? No, we don't think that. We just do it. This system is fast. It has to be fast, and we don't really get a whole lot of opportunity to process it. Um, because it's so fast, it also misfires all the time. Your brain is like, better safe than sorry. So it's going to misfire all the time. And the best example I have of this is the jump scare. When you're watching a spooky movie this Halloween season, you might be watching some spooky movies or getting some scares from kids. That is a misfire of our stress response system. That's our amygdala, right? We see that thing, that monster jumps out at us and we go, right? And that upward movement, that is our amygdala saying danger. And then that is our hypothalamus and hippocampus saying, all right, you're good. This is a misfire. It's not real. This is just something that's not real, right? But it's over like that. It's already over. And so when I think about how our stress response system has this super quick processing, it misfires all the time. I also think about how like we have no control over it most of the time. Have you ever been watching the spooky movie and you know that the jump scare is coming and you still can't stop it? Right? It's like dun 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 dun. Right? Like, you know the jump scare's coming, but you still can't stop it. That's because the system is set up to protect us. And when we experience that stress response system, our hippocampus uh, is absolutely full with very unique files for each and every one of us based on our own experiences and based on all of the things that we've gone through in life. Even identical twins have completely different sets of hypothalamus files, right? Because different things make us feel different things. So when I think about that filing cabinet though, it helps me remember that mine is different from yours. And so if mine is different from yours, that means that you and I might have a different reaction to the exact same stimulus in front of us. So let's say you and me were watching Jaws together and I see the shark come up out of the water and my response is got me. Because in that blip of a second, my hippocampus isn't just pulling out one file that says you're watching a movie, misfire. No, it's pulling out thousands of files of me watching spooky movies as a kid, laughing, having fun with my mom. It's pulling out thousands of files of me at haunted houses, with kids around the corner, boo, right? All of these files. And in this blip of a second, my hippocampus says, not only is this a misfire and you're safe, but also you kind of like this thing, laugh. And that's what I do. But as I said, you and me, we're watching Jaws together, and you see the shark come up out of the water, and your response is different than mine, like really different. So different that I might not understand it. So different that I might try to problem solve. I might try to be rational with you, but none of that will matter because when your brain saw the shark come up out of the water, your hippocampus didn't pull out files of spooky movies and haunted houses. No, your hippocampus pulled out the hundreds of thousands of files that it stored when you were 10 years old and you were bit by a shark. Well, all of a sudden, your reaction is going to be very different than mine. And I might try to problem solve and say, hey, we're not even in the water. You're safe. Like, you're in my house. I might try to be rational and say, like, oh, I mean, Jaws doesn't even really look like a real shark, or you're safe. None of that will matter because your brain knows one thing for sure, and that is that sharks are dangerous and it's going to act accordingly. And it will happen so quickly that you won't have time to process it. You won't have a whole lot of control over it, right? And it can put you in a space where you might do or say things that you might later regret. This is how our system works so quickly over time. When we think about our kiddos who are coming into our school spaces, into our classrooms, into our organizations, into our hallways, into our whatever however we see young people, many of them are coming in with giant filing cabinets just chock full of sad and scary events, sad and scary experiences, right? And so, just like everybody else, they have an active stress response system. Just like everybody else, that stress response system is so fast that they barely process it. Just like absolutely everyone else, it will misfire all the time. But for them, the thing that is different is that they will perceive real danger where there is none. I can perceive real danger where there is none. When I get into that spot of my brain, like I said, we stop really acting human at that point. So the two parts of my brain that we're talking about here are the limbic brain and the frontal lobe. Now the limbic brain houses like all of that, like fight, flight, or freeze stuff, right? And so I like to think of my limbic brain as the Muppet animal. Are you guys familiar with the Muppet animal? Right. That's because my limbic brain's absolutely crazy. And like, even though he saves my life all the time, he's crazy. He does things that I later regret. And honestly, he's kind of a jerk because he doesn't even want to work with other parts of my brain. Most importantly, my frontal lobe. So I like to think of my frontal lobe, which is the human part of our brain, both sides right here. This is the most human part of our brain. I like to think of my frontal lobe as Skeeter from the Muppets. If you're a Muppet Babies fan, she's twin sisters to Scooter. If you don't know this Muppet, that's fine. Just know that she's a smart Muppet. And how we know she's a smart Muppet is she's wearing glasses. That's how you tell a smart Muppet, right? So, like I said, my wild animal brain is kind of a jerk. He doesn't even want to work with Skeeter. He'll say, no, I've got it. Right. And that gets me in trouble a lot. And it gets a lot of us in trouble. Right. The best example I have of this, have you ever lost your keys? I'm sure you have. Right. I just experienced this earlier today. I lost my keys. Um, So when you lose your keys, if you're anything like me, wild animal takes over, right? I know I'm racing through my house. I'm ripping things apart, blah, 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 right? I'm maybe flipping over furniture. I'm crying. I'm sweating. I'm swearing, right? I'm making this whole production. Meanwhile, my Skeeter brain, she's hanging back and she's like, oh, I know where your keys are, but I guess I'll just have to wait till you calm down. Right? And my wild animal does what he's really good at, and that's tiring himself out. It's like I go and go and go until I land into a puddle of tears and sweat and swear words. And I find myself doing this like deep breathing thing in those moments. It's never usually like a restorative or like a meditative deep breath. It's usually like a like right? It's that kind of deep breathing that I get going. And it's actually that deep breathing that allows Skeeter to come forward. And now Skeeter coming forward, she's able to say, "Oh, baby, your keys, they've been hanging right here this whole time." My wild animal brain will say, "Wait, what? I looked there twice." My Skeeter brain says, "I know, baby, you don't see very well." And then my wild animal brain says, "Wait, what?" And Skeeter says, "I know, baby, you don't listen very well either. You need me for all that work. We need our human thinking brain, Skeeter, on board for any of the human work that we're doing." And if we have kiddos coming into our spaces that are stuck in that red zone over and over and over again, they are literally living in this wild animal brain. Even if they are eyes on you, four on the floor, if this is what's going on up here, you could run through your lesson plans all day long, and they will not learn it, retain it, or be able to later recall it because that requires Skeeter to do all of that work. And if I'm only working with animal, it's not going to happen. So this impacts the learning that can happen in everyday experiences, whether it be in a formal setting like school or in a community organization. This impacts the ways that we are able to learn. And, sometimes folks, when I talk about strategies and the things that we do, to help kids get into their Skeeter brains, sometimes people are a little critical of me and they might say things like, "Oh, well, those strategies sound good for like hippies." And I'm like, well, I mean, they are good for hippies, but they're good for everybody too. Or sometimes I'll hear folks say things like, well, I could see this working in like kindergarten, first, second, but like I'm 11th grade chemistry. I don't think this is going to fly. It's actually good for every human. That's why I've already asked you to take a deep breath with me in this hour, right? It works for everyone and is needed by everyone. Sometimes I hear folks say things like, well, I'm on board. I think that social emotional learning seems like a really great thing that we should add, but I just don't have time, right? I have to squeeze all of this in. I have to do 90 minutes here, or I have 42 minutes here. This is all I get. And I can appreciate and empathize with that time crunch. But what is actually pretty amazing is that if you dedicate just 30 seconds to a minute up top to deep breathing, you're going to have a big difference on the back end. I think that we spend a lot of time trying to call classrooms to attention, right? We spend a lot of time, kind of keeping kids on track. But when we incorporate things like deep breathing, which is the number one strategy, there's I don't think any other strategy other than a loving, wonderful, positive adult in your life. I think deep breathing's the second best, right? Because the more we do deep breathing, the more we're in that Skeeter brain. There's research that I have linked on the Live Binder if you're interested that shows that when kids take deep breaths all day, every day. So we just got off the bus, we're taking a deep breath. We just got, through homeroom, heading into first period, we're going to take a deep breath, right? We just moved from our carpet reading time back to the tables, we're going to take a deep breath, right? Deep breathing all day, every day. Those kiddos achieve 11 to 17% higher on state standardized testing. What? Not because we're teaching them anything differently, but because we're giving them a moment to get into that human thinking brain so that they can learn it. This is such a powerful thing. I'm telling you, deep breathing is the cheapest, the easiest, and the most effective thing that we can add into our everyday, that really helps moving kids into that space for learning. Um, and that's not just kids who've experienced trauma, that's every kid, right? That 11 to 17%, that's not of kids who've experienced trauma, that's everybody, right? So it's good for everybody. It's going to be especially good for our kiddos who might be experiencing high levels of stress, but it's going to be good for everybody. So I took a really long time to kind of get to the definition of what traumatic stress is. And I do that because I think that it is important to understand how those bricks solidify over time, right? And we can imagine those bricks stacking one on top of another, right? For these kiddos. And when we're talking about traumatic stress, I think sometimes because of the popularity or trendiness of talking about trauma, like on TikTok and things, um, sometimes folks will say things like, well, didn't everybody experience trauma as a kid, right? Didn't everybody have something sad and scary happen to them, right? Now, why are we all of a sudden talking about this? Well, eh, so I can't speak to whether or not every person experienced something sad and scary when they were a kid. I don't know that that's true. But what I do know is that that's not what trauma is. That trauma is more than just experiencing something sad and scary, and that there are millions of people who experience sad and scary events and do not have a traumatic reaction or traumatic stress response, because there's several things involved in building and solidifying that brick, right? So it's that experiencing of that sad and scary event. And then also with an absence of positive adult buffering. And, we do buffering all the time. This is just like the things that we do with kids all the time that just help them better understand, better navigate what they're feeling, better, talk about what they're feeling in this situation. One of the best examples of adult buffering that I think about is the example of a thunderstorm. So, have you ever had that where you're with a kid and there's a thunderstorm and you're doing that like game where you're like, okay, we'll see the lightning and now let's count how many seconds till the thunder, right? And that's how many miles away it is or whatever, right? Um, that's actually adult buffering. How I know that's adult buffering is because I know that in those moments that I'm doing that, I'm not trying to teach science. I also don't know the science around that. Is that real? I don't know. But what I'm trying to do in that moment is something different than teach science, right? What I'm trying to do is help them feel distracted, help them feel connected to another human, help them feel like I know what's going on. This maybe isn't as unpredictable as it feels and as chaotic and scary as it feels. Um, I mean, I can't overstate just the presence of like I'm the grown up and I know what's up, how safe that can feel for a kid. Um, uh, but it's also, yeah, it's something that they can predict, that they can have control over, understanding in this space. It's so many different things other than teaching science in those moments. And that's how I know that it's an adult buffering circumstance. So if I'm a child who, let's imagine a very small infant lying in a crib, right? And there is just the biggest, loudest, longest thunderstorm you could ever imagine. And that child is crying and screaming and no adult ever comes to help soothe, help understand, help feel safe from that experience. Those are the situations that start building and solidifying those bricks. Now imagine those kiddos who maybe are experiencing something that is a lot scarier or a lot more chaotic than a thunderstorm, right? Really scary events. And when we talk about trauma, it's not about experiencing those events, it's about experiencing them alone, that we're alone when we experience them. Another thing that's important to know is that so it's adult buffering, and but it's also very much keyed into our own individual perception, right? So however you personally see that thing is it's going to impact whether or not it's a traumatic event or not. And this is what makes it hard for us to kind of pin a nail on a definition, because what is trauma to one person may not be trauma to another person. So that makes it tough. So sometimes folks will say, well, is a car accident trauma? I say, well, yeah, and no. It depends. It depends on a whole lot of things, right? Let's say we've got a mom, and in her car, she's got a 16-year-old in the front passenger seat and a 6-year-old watching a tablet in the back driver's side, right? Mom goes through the green light, and someone runs a red light and T-bones into the passenger side door. What does that 16-year-old have by way of developmental understanding that is different from that 6-year-old, that helps him better understand or navigate what that risk just was for him? What actual auditory and visual stimulus was different? Maybe that 16-year-old saw it all coming and the 6-year-old didn't look up until it was all over, right? All of those kinds of things can have an impact on whether or not this child is going to perceive this as trauma. So this is a circumstance where you have the exact same situation, the exact same event, and the assumed exact same parental positive adult buffering happening, but one child's having a harder time and another child's just fine, because that personal perception makes a huge impact too. So that means that no one can tell you that your trauma is not trauma, because you're the only one who would know that it is trauma. Um, so when we're talking about trauma, as I said, it's experiencing those events without the experiencing them alone, and our individual perception is moving toward that very traumatic and very scary event. Well, at this point now, we might start to see some impacts in overall health and condition. And when I think about this the impact, it really is across the board. It can impact every part of our lives in a lot of different ways. I think of sometimes people call it like a suitcase, like a backpack they carry around. I've kind of revised my thoughts on that. I don't really like that. So I'm a child of trauma, and I don't like thinking of my trauma as like a suitcase, because it implies I can set it down, right? I could put it down and walk away from it. And that's not how I carry my trauma, and that's not how most people carry their trauma. I like to think of trauma more as like a painter's palette, right? With all the colors on the painter's palette. It's because I see like splashes of trauma on kind of everything I do, right? There's splashes of trauma in my physical health. There's splashes of trauma in the ways that I choose what meals I'm going to have. There's splashes of trauma in the ways that I parent, in the ways that I, engage with the school teachers. There's, all these things are kind of splattered with my trauma. It's not something I can just like pick up and put down. It's something that's kind of really integrated into who I am as a person. And so, as I said, it is across the board. Physically, this can really a big variety of things. You know how when you are super stressed and you experience things like chronic headaches, chronic tummy aches, right? Fatigue, irritability. Those are all physical responses to that hefty load of hormones and chemicals, that 1,600 different combinations that's happening in our body. We are carrying that with us and it makes us sick. It truly does. And so, I think sometimes when we are working with kiddos, we have to recognize that they might not be lying or trying to get out of math when they say their belly hurts, right? Even if it's at the same time every day. I My stress, I know that I am able to cope with my stress until I can't. And sometimes it's like hard to know where that line is, right? And it's hard for kids too. So maybe for them, they're coming into school and they're at a 7, and by second period, they're at an 8. And by lunch, they're at a 9. Then we pull out math books and they're at a 10. Every day, same thing. This doesn't mean that, again, I have to change my expectations or boundaries. Like, you have to do math work, right? It just changes the way that I think about the ways that I can help assist in bringing that temperature down, right? That I could do things like deep breathing. Those kiddos who walked in at a 4 or 5, they're going to be great. They'll be at like a 3 or 4, they'll be great, right? But those kiddos who are at a 9, if we do a deep breath, I'm going to get them down to maybe even a 7, and it's going to take that much more for them to reach that 10. Right? I'm fighting against that heat all day long, fighting against that heat. And I could do that. I could say, okay, well, maybe 2 minutes before we pull out math books, I know, let's do a deep breath. I know 10 minutes before we pull out math books, I might give him a kind of a, hey, what's going to happen in 10 minutes, right? Reminder. Those are things that we do, that we set up at a tier 1 level, that create a space that allows everybody to stay in that 4 to 7 zone as much as possible. That's our goal. Um, and we have to practice those things all the time because many of them don't know how to stay in those zones. This isn't just a superficial physical impact. It's very much a deeper neurological impact as well. When you look at some of the research, particularly research in that age group, that 0 to 3 years old that I already spoke about when it came to kind of getting pre-wired into that red zone, that 0 to 3 zone is a really important time. This is when our brain is making the most foundational of development. So when you see that trauma is happening during that time, the impact is happening on what's developing at that time. So it's going to impact some of the most foundational pieces of that child's brain development. So sometimes there are children who experience trauma who struggle with thermoregulation, meaning they struggle to maintain their own body temperature. Some kiddos who experience trauma during those ages, this is when we see socially difficult or insecure attachment, right? So those real foundational pieces of what makes us human can be affected. But as I said, when you start looking across the developmental timeline, when kids are exposed to trauma in different spots of that timeline, it can impact the neurological development during that time. So if you think about, maybe I didn't experience trauma at all until I was 8 years old. Well, I'm probably going to be able to maintain my body temperature. I'm probably going to have a pretty secure attachment. But maybe you might start to see some differences in my moving from concrete thinking into beginning abstract thinking, because that's what's happening at 8 years old. You might start to see some differences in my ability to create friendships and peer relationships, because that's what's happening socially at 8 years old. Let's say I don't experience trauma at all until I'm 15 years old. Well, I'm probably going to have a pretty good attachment. Probably going to be able to maintain my body temperature. Basic, abstract thoughts going to be pretty good. I'm going to have some good friendships, but you might start to see some differences in my higher level judgment, my higher level executive functioning, my romantic relationship building, because those are the things that are happening at 15 years old. Now we can think about kiddos who might be experiencing trauma all along that developmental timeline. Why I said it's an ever evolving experience, because it's not just this one thing happening. Many of them are experiencing it over time, and it can impact many different types of many different facets of their development overall. Um, some of you might have seen this picture. Oh, maybe not. Let me turn the page. There we go. Some of you might have seen this picture. This picture helps me understand that neurological impact. You know, our brain is very much a use it or lose it type of system. And we need to be using a lot of different parts of our brain to make sure that we're building that strength over time. This was a research study done by the Ohio Department of Health. I'm sorry, that's not true. The Center for Disease Control is who did this. It was a national study. And really, they were looking at how brain development and function and structure can be different based on trauma. So these are PET scan images. So these are two images from the top down. So that area above the circles is that frontal lobe space, that human thinking brain. Our child on the left is a typical 3-year-old child, very typical achieving. You can see all that red hot action in that frontal lobe. She's learning shapes. She's learning colors. She's learning beginning emotional regulation, right? She's learning words like crazy, right? That's that sponge of a brain we think about for a 3-year-old kiddo. And then our child here on the right, this is a 3-year-old that was taken from a Romanian orphanage. And this child experienced abuse, neglect, and hunger. You can see that though these kids are going to walk into kindergarten on the same day, they're going to have different needs. They're going to have very different needs. And, you know, this child on the right, she's not acting that way because she's a jerk. She's not acting that way because she's trying to manipulate you to get you to do something. She's not acting that way because she doesn't have enough boundaries in her foster home. She's acting that way because she has different needs, right? And we are able to be scaffolding in that space to help provide additional needs for, or help provide additional supports for kiddos who have different and unique needs. You know, what I think is the best part of knowing our brain and how it works is that our brain can heal, like literally heal. Like we can re-strengthen that synaptic strength, those neurons. We can reconnect those things and heal our brain. And I'm sure you've kind of anecdotally seen this, right? You know, someone who maybe has had a really serious concussion or a traumatic brain injury or a stroke, and they were able to relearn how to speak or walk or whatever it was that they needed to relearn how to do. That is evidence of our brain healing. And I think even we probably have seen it anecdotally with kids too, socially and emotionally, right? That like it's like every day that that child is with that positive foster family, it's they're healing, right? They just seem so much healthier and happier. And I think we've always kind of attributed that to a specific social and emotional growth, which it is, but it's also very much a neurological growth that's happening during this time. So what's amazing is that our brains can heal, and that it doesn't take surgery and it doesn't take a pill. What it takes is positive adult connections and positive adult buffering. You guys, this is your superpower, right? Like this is what we do all day, every day, connecting with kids and, you know, buffering for kids. This is us. Like we could do this crap. That's nuts. That's awesome, right? And what's really cool is that kids are really good at healing, right? There's a big difference between breaking your leg at 7 and breaking your leg at 70, right? Because kids are good at healing. So that means these kiddos, they're walking through our doors 7, 8 hours a day in this window of opportunity where they are like the most efficient healers. And we're coming to the table with the specific set of talents and skills required to do this healing, right? This healing is possible for us. It's not something that's easy and it's not something that is quick, but it is something that is doable. And when the work is put in, the benefits are just phenomenal on the outside. I just find kids who have experienced things in their lives like this, they end up being like the most you know, contributing members of our communities. They're the people who you know, are the best people to go to when you're having a hard day. They're the people who really step up and help others. Like, these kids are worth it. They're worth the extra effort. They really truly are. And unfortunately, though, I know that in the systems that we have at school, we've got a lot of kids that come in, or maybe we only get 42 minutes with each kid, that this doesn't always happen. And so this is when we start to see some of those cognitive differences at school, right? Kiddos who are identified with kind of over identified with different types of disorders. I'm not saying that, I mean, there are plenty of children who are appropriately diagnosed with ADHD, right? There are plenty of children who have experienced trauma who are appropriately diagnosed with ADHD. But I also know there's a Venn diagram of behaviors for things like ADHD and trauma and ODD and trauma. And right, you can start seeing some of those Venn diagrams. Again, not that it's only that, it's just it can be that. And we start to see differences in test taking, memory, just overall achievement. They struggle. And so we know it impacts kids physically and neurologically and cognitively, and it also impacts kids emotionally. And I think that there's a couple of different ways that I think about this. First is just basic emotional literacy. Most kids, I would say, most kids have less emotional literacy than they could have, right? I think sometimes we let kids get away with happy, sad, and mad, and that's kind of, we're like, okay, good. But kids are capable of actually a really rich vocabulary when it comes to their emotions. And when a child has the right words to articulate how they're feeling, they're actually able to get their needs met in a clearer way. So you may have had this happen where a child will say, come to you maybe, and they'll say, I'm pissed off, right? And you say, oh, okay. Maybe you're thinking of interventions. Well, here's what I do when I'm frustrated. Here's what I do when I'm mad, right? And the child just seems to be getting more pissed off. And you're like, what is happening? I'm just trying to help you. But maybe for the child's feeling anxious. But I don't know that word. The only word I know is pissed. And the tools that you're giving me, I know aren't going to help me feel better. And so now I am pissed, right? So being able to articulate this through my vocabulary, I actually am better able to get my needs met from the people I seek help from. But it's not just about my emotional words. Kiddos who experience trauma can struggle with emotional regulation. So these are the kiddos who might, I'll hear things like, oh, she's got two speeds. She's either crazy or asleep, right? That to me is a sign of emotional regulation versus, mute that real quick. Okay. Um, when a child is kind of at that crazy or asleep space, right? I find that to be more evidence of emotional regulation need than behavior need, where like this child's really good at a 10 and they're really good at a 1. It's the 4 to 7 green zone that they don't know how to do, right? And just like you can't detention me into knowing how to fix the transmission in your car, we're never going to be able to detention a child into knowing how to be in that 4 to 7 zone. The only way we can do it is through teaching, and that's our biz. We know how to do that work, right? So we know that trauma impacts us physically, neurologically, cognitively, emotionally, and then it impacts us socially in the ways that we interact with other people in our lives. And, I feel like there's kind of two sides to this coin. On one side of the coin is the child who struggles to connect with peers, struggles to connect with adults, kind of self isolates, self withdraw from activities, right? That's certainly one presentation that can come from trauma. But I always want to give voice to the other side of this coin because that was me as a child. So as a kid, I'm a child of trauma. And as a child, I was absolutely insane. I was crazy. I was always talking. I was always telling jokes. I knew everybody. I was a cheerleader my whole like elementary, middle, and high school. I was voted my senior year out of like 450 kids. I was voted most outgoing in the class, right? That I've always kind of been this person. And so I think a lot of the adults in my life, had they been asked, well, how's Missy doing socially? They would have said, well, I mean, of all the things, I feel like she's got a good handle on her social life, right? But looking back on it now, I wonder if they had kind of taken one step in, if they had peeled one layer back, I think those adults would have recognized pretty quickly that I actually wasn't authentically connecting to other people, right? Sometimes when we experience trauma, we get very good at this performance that everything's just fine, right? I knew everyone. No one knew me. No one. And when I look back, I see, with my, eyes now, I can see that there were kids that were getting interventions for friendship building and interventions for, positive relationships. I just wasn't getting those interventions because nobody thought I needed them. Why would they? Right? I was doing a pretty good job of pretending. Um, Now that isn't to say that like every one of your outgoing kids has experienced trauma. I don't I don't believe that. But I do think that it is worth that step in and not to make that assumption that just because someone maybe looks like they have a lot of friends or looks like they are connected to a lot of people, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are genuinely and have genuine relationships. And still to even this day for me, I graduated from high school and I never spoke to anyone I went to high school with ever again. I went to college. I did make a couple friends, but I have two close friends. But I still struggle today to have like one-to-one interactions with people. It's still a struggle for me. So recognizing that this can kind of go both ways is important. All right, so it's physical impact, neurological impact, emotional impact, social impact, cognitive impact, and then it starts to impact the way that we cope as humans, because every single one of us as a human being, we have to cope. We have to be able to have coping mechanisms that make us feel better in moments of hardship, right? Every single one of us have these coping mechanisms. Some coping mechanisms are better than others. And when I look at this list of coping mechanisms, these are all of those like maladaptive, kind of negative looking coping mechanisms. I also see all of our programs, all of our school money programs, effort, energy, red ribbon weeks and homecoming or prom assemblies, right? Like I see a lot of stuff that we do in schools to prevent some of this. And I think that sometimes if we get caught up into those types of programs, we kind of lose the thread that these are coping mechanisms because that's what they are. Myself as a teenager, I participated in every single one of these negative coping mechanisms and more. Um, and again, I think back on who I was at that time. I imagine that most of the adults in my life did not know that I was engaging in these activities. I think that some adults would have been surprised to find that out. But thinking about that at the time, you know, it was what I needed to feel better. And like that word maladaptive is so hard because it to me it kind of makes it feel like there's this like obvious choice, right? Because it's bone adaptive or maladaptive. So like bone in French is good and mal is bad, right? And it implies that there is this choice, but so many of us who experience trauma, we don't have the choices that you think we do, right? Where I think about myself as a kid, again, participating in every single one of these, like I was going through some really, really terrible things, really scary things. And I had to cope. And I didn't know a single person in my life that did deep breathing. I didn't know a single person that exercised as stress relief. I didn't know a single person. I don't think I'd ever even heard of like meditation or mindfulness at that time. Like I didn't know people who did bone adaptive coping mechanisms, but I knew a ton of people that were using tobacco, drugs, alcohol, other types of reckless behavior to feel better. And the thing is that we don't always want to admit in schools is that this stuff works. It works for a little bit. It does make us feel better for a little bit, right? And we have to recognize that these coping mechanisms that we go to, um, sometimes kids don't know the other ways. They don't have that choice between, because the choice isn't do drugs or don't do drugs. The choice is survive or don't. And when I think about that, like it reminds me of when I went to that prom assembly. I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to one or have ever been a part of one, but I remember we had to walk down to, I was in high school and I had to walk down to our stadium, our football stadium, and there were these two cars that were crashed into each other. And our friends from like the drama club with fake blood out of their mouths were like hanging out of the cars and stuff. Um and it was this whole assembly and this whole kind of mock-up of all of this stuff. And I mean, I remember sitting through that and just being like, okay, like it didn't impact me, I think, in the way that other people thought it would. And I was a pretty heavy drinker in high school, and I did drink at a prom. But I think about that because I think about how the alcohol and drugs that I was using at that time in my life, I felt like I was already dying. And so when you say to me like drugs and alcohol are going to kill you, that didn't make sense to me because those were the things that were helping me get to school in the morning, wake myself up, get out the door. Those were the things that were helping me get on the school bus to go to cheer away games. There were, I mean, there was just so much of my coping that helped me survive during that time. And so when I think about how we can address this differently in schools, how can we, instead of putting all of this energy and effort into like that just say no, or it's going to kill you place, could we truly systemically from pre-K through 12th grade, every day, all day, teaching and practicing those positive bone adaptive coping mechanisms, that deep breathing, that mindfulness, that stuff that actually does work to help us cope, and it works on the long term for us, not just the short term. So that when we have a student who maybe is coming up to a situation that feels unbearable for them, now they actually do have the choice that we thought they had to begin with, because they do know both, because they're going to see the one side in the community anyway. I don't know, I get a little high horsey about that, but I think that it's one of those things that we could think about, because it truly is like primary prevention at its heart. And if we're looking at kids who are, I see all the time, staff who, there'll be students who are suspended for vaping, right? And for me, the first question should be what's going on, what's happening in that child's life that they have to be coping with vaping, because that's what's happening. Because it's not the kids who are having just like the great time and great parents and super involved and like it's not the great kids that are in the bathroom vaping, right? We always know there's something going on, and that this vaping is a symptom of it, and that we actually can use that as an opportunity to provide true support and services versus just kind of suspension and more isolation, because that will actually only exacerbate the problem. So as I said, oh man, there we go. You guys disappeared for a second. So trauma impacts us physically, it impacts us neurologically, it impacts us emotionally and socially, and it impacts the ways that we begin to cope. And then it starts to impact our really overall physical health. And this is the last thing I'm going to talk to us about today. And we'll get into a lot more in the future sessions, but this is a chunk of research that's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And if you haven't heard of it, to me, this is like the craziest study ever, and like the thing that's made like the most huge impact on my life. And like, I don't usually get that excited about like academic research, but it is like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So this is relatively new science. It started in the early 1990s with these two super cool dudes. We've got on the left Dr. Felitti, I think. Let me see. Yeah, Dr. Felitti's on the left. I have your faces covering theirs. Dr. Felitti's on the left and Dr. Anda's on the right. And it started with Dr. Felitti, and he was working in California for Kaiser Permanente. And his research was focused around folks who were participating in their bariatric center. So folks that were on a pre-bariatric surgery diet and folks who had had the bariatric surgery. And basically his research was just, do these diets work? Does this surgery work? Are people able to lose weight? Is it manageable and functional for human beings? And so at first he was like, absolutely, this is awesome. People losing weight left and right. This is so great. And then over time, though, he started to realize that folks who were seriously committed, I mean, physically, emotionally, financially committed to weight loss, all of a sudden they were starting to regain weight, and he wanted to know why. And he started asking different types of questions, and he started meeting with them more frequently. And one after another, he started to see a trend of sad and scary events when they were kids, things that they had experienced alone. And when some 62% of the clientele that were coming into this bariatric program reported sad and scary events from their childhood, he said, this is something. This is something more than diet. This is something more than exercise or willpower. Like, this is something else. And that's when he connected with Dr. Anda. And at the time, Dr. Anda was working for the Center for Disease Control. And again, early 1990s, his research was around overall stress and how it impacts your heart, cardiovascular health. So I imagine that Dr. Felitti calls up Dr. Anda and says, hey, man, I think it's more than our hearts that are impacted by stress, because I'm working with folks here in California who have, chronic obesity, type 2 diabetes, like a whole host of other physical health problems. And I think that the stress is actually specific to stress that we experience when we're kids. So they said, all right, what are we going to do? How are we going to study this? So what they did was they made a short list of 10 common traumas, 10 common things that we know that human beings experience that have an impact on their lives, right? So they made this list. They knew it could have been 100 long, but they just were going to focus on these 10 things. And they said, what we'll do is we'll send this list of 10 things out to a bunch of people. And if you've experienced this thing, then you get a point. And if you didn't experience it, then you don't get a point. So you can score anywhere from 0 to 10, and that becomes your adverse childhood experiences score, or your ACE score, ACE. So they had a huge sample. The first sample that came in was 17,333 folks. And what they found was actually quite staggering. They found that over and over and over again, not only was trauma way more prevalent than anyone had ever really researched or documented before, but also that it had serious impact on their overall physical health. So now, since the early 1990s, this research has been done with millions and millions and millions of people. This has been replicated all over the world by thousands and thousands of researchers. I have linked their original website that has all of the research that comes in. There's a ton of replicated research that gets sent into their website. So you can see how does this trauma specifically impact your risk for COPD, right? Like, it gets that specific. So if you're interested, I have that linked on my live binder, that you can look at their original research as well as all of the replicated research. But what they found, as I said, it has this huge impact. They started following people over their lifespan. They're still following the surviving members of that first cohort today, right? Millions and millions of more. And at Akron Children's, I know that we ask a form of these 10 questions as kids come in to the hospital, because we know the impact that it can have on their overall physical health. So I'm going to show you first the 10 things. And as I said, you can give yourself a score anywhere from 0 to 10. You don't have to tell me or anybody else. I just think it's something that's important to know about yourself. And then I'll show you some of the outcomes. And then I'll kind of talk a little bit about some little overarching things. So the 10 things, they cover first the abuses. So 3 abuses: physical and emotional abuse first. They detail that this abuse was perpetrated by someone who was serving as a caretaker in your life. So a parent, a grandparent, a foster parent, daycare, babysitter, um, some other type of caregiver. Sexual abuse, it could have been perpetrated by someone that you knew, loved, and lived with. It could have also been a complete stranger or someone you only kind of knew. And it did not have to happen more than once for it to count. In the neglect section, we have physical neglect. This is the feeling as a child that you didn't have enough food, clothing that was weather appropriate or clean, a safe, warm place to sleep. Emotional neglect is the feeling that the adults in your life didn't know what you were doing, they didn't know where you were, they didn't care about you or love you or protect you. In our household traumas, this is a member of your household suffered with addiction or substance abuse. A member of your household was incarcerated. A member of your household experienced a mental health crises or attempted suicide. And a member of your household was treated violently. I know it details their mother, but subsequent research has kind of removed gender from this. It's just the witnessing of violence in the home, of physical violence among your caregivers. And then the last one is loss of parent due to divorce, death, abandonment, or other reason. So as I said, these are kind of the 10, but they knew off the bat that there was 100 others that we could have included. So when I look at my own personal score, so I have an A score of an 8, but it's only 7 of these things. And that's because my eighth trauma was that when I was 16 years old, my boyfriend died. So peer loss isn't indicated here, but it's certainly a trauma that still impacts me today. So sometimes you might hear folks say things like, oh, well, she's got an A score of 13 or he's got an A score of 17. It's because they're including things that are outside of this original 10. Um, so before I show you kind of the overall impact, I just want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. Um, this is not a death sentence. I know that sometimes it can be really scary when we look at like, oh my gosh, this is what's going to happen. But I don't know. We tend to be a little casual about our own health. I think if some of us are starting to rack up a number for a child that we love, it can get really scary and we can wonder what their future will hold. But that is why I share my number. I have a score of an 8 and like I currently feel okay. I have college degrees. I have been in the same job forever. I own a home. I'm happily married, at least on my end. Like, I mean, I live like as typical of a life as you can think of, right? Because this ACE score, this isn't the end of the story for a child. It's just part of the story, right? It's part of the story. And I can think back in my life, yeah, I had these 8 things stacked up against me, but I also had adults in my life, particularly for me at school, who were stacking up protective factors like a little army ready to defend me and protect me from these risks, right? So it's much less about what this number is and much more about what this number needs to be. But I will show you the overall impact. What they found is that, the higher a person's ACE score, the higher they are at risk for a myriad of negative health coping mechanisms and negative health outcomes. They even identified a score, and that score is 4. So once a person reaches the score of 4, their risk actually skyrockets. So if you look on that research that I told you about that's on the live binder, you'll see like bar graphs and it'll say like, okay, your risk at 1 is here, your risk at 2 is here, your risk at 3 is here, and then your risk at 4 jumps way up to here, and then it's exponential from there. Um, Difference between a 3 and a 4. 4 is 2 times more likely than a 3 to smoke. A 4 is 6 times more likely to struggle with alcohol than a 3. A 4 is 46 times more likely than a 3 to try intravenous drug use in their lifetime. A 4 is 1,200% more likely to attempt suicide in their lifetime than the 3. Once a person reaches a score of 6, their life can be diminished by 20 years. That's a huge, huge impact on our lives. Again, we have this risk. We also have those protective factors that protect us from that risk. It's not the end of the story. It's just a part of the story. The last thing I wanted to cover was also from this study, and really we've already gone over most of this from the third rung up, right? The experiencing of adverse child events, the cognitive, social, neurological differences, adoption of unhealthy risk behaviors, unhealthy diseases, disabilities, other types of social problems, and then early death, right? We've kind of already talked about all of that. What we haven't talked about are the two bottom ones. Now, I have much more information and research on my live binder regarding these two lower levels, but just to tap on them for a second. um, when we're looking at that very bottom level, this is historical trauma or the intergenerational transmission of trauma. And what that means is that we pass trauma down, and we pass this down first off behaviorally. If there's not an interruption of cycle, I will parent the way I was parented, right? Unless I make a change. So often we're behaviorally passing it down, but we also genetically pass this down. And I recognize that when I was a child experiencing trauma, that it wasn't just my brain and my body and my social experience that it was impacting. It was also impacting my eggs. And since every one of us who is born female is born with every single egg we will ever have, I recognize that decades before my children were, a glimmer in their daddy's eye, they were impacted by my trauma because my eggs are impacted by my trauma. We pass this stuff down. There is research, very good research, if you're interested, on folks who survived the Holocaust and went on to have children and grandchildren, great grandchildren, um, folks who survived slavery and went on to have children and grandchildren and great grandchildren. We pass trauma on. And then the next level up is the social determinants of health or adverse community events. This is just the luck of being born during a pandemic, the luck of being born into a community of poverty, right? That I'm being born into a situation that's going to put me at higher risk for personal experience of these adverse events. So my final thoughts on this is just that I think sometimes as educators, as people who care about children, we tend to be like the most empathetic, and our hearts open up for these kids. Like we truly love these kids and we truly want them to succeed. And we're willing to do just about anything to help them get there, right? Um, and I also though know how it feels as we move further in the year, and now it's March and April, and like, oh my God, can he just stay in the classroom? Why does he keep running out? I know how easy it can get to get frustrated and overwhelmed with the behaviors. And so anytime I find myself in that space of overwhelm, I think of this little pyramid in my mind, and it makes me remember that if a child's experiencing trauma, that these behaviors are really something that is stemmed from something that's going to impact every part of his life, possibly for the rest of his shortened life. And that for many of the kids I'm working with, it's generations in the making. So if I'm looking for one strategy with three objectives that are going to turn that all around, I'm going to be setting myself up for frustration. But what's wonderful is that there is an answer. There are things that we can do every day that can help grow those brains, heal those brains, and build positive, thriving environments for them. So we are going to get into that in our second session, how we build those thriving environments. Like I said, there's nothing that I'm going to say in any of the sessions that's going to be better than take deep breaths. So if you want to start implementing something right now, implement that. Take deep breaths with your kiddos. Take them yourself and have kiddos take them too, because there's going to be nothing better than that. But next time we get together, I'm going to talk about how we build those environments, how we can look at our PBIS systems through a trauma-informed lens, how we can look at really our school environment, our classroom environment, et cetera. So I hope that you join me. I want to first show this slide. This is the slide that is from Beth, and I think she has something to say.
Yeah, this is just a feedback survey. If you could take a few minutes to complete this for us, that helps us with our planning and knowing what to offer. I did also post the link in the chat if that's easier to access than the QR code, so that link is there. But thank you so much for your your time, and thanks, Missy, for presenting. We will send a follow-up email tomorrow that will have, again, the information for the link for Missy's live binder, and then the details for our next session, the feedback survey as well. So look for a follow-up email tomorrow and your contact hours for participating today. I know that's important. So that'll all come out tomorrow morning.
Okay, and I'm going to show my contact information again. I just want to make sure everyone gets enough time with this one. I can always go back. But here's my contact information again. And this also has the dates of our next sessions that are coming up. So this is that Pinterest again. This is that live binder again. Beth is kindly putting it into the chat again. This is my survey. You don't have to take at all, especially since Beth is having a survey. You guys take that. You don't have to take mine unless you really want to take mine. I'm the only one who sees that one. So if there's like something that you really want me to know specifically, you can do that. But otherwise, I can't wait to see you guys in just a couple weeks in November. And hopefully you guys will have started some deep breathing in your spaces. I can hang out for questions too. If anyone has questions, I'll hang out. But otherwise, I'm all done. Have a great night, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Missy, my name is Jessica. I'm the social worker for Oregon City Schools.
Hi.
First of all, thank you for sharing everything today. It was very, very helpful and informative. I want to go back to when you first mentioned taking the deep breaths and how
Yes.
important that is for the classroom, and even just a simple, I mean, it's just something so simple to reset. Um,
Mhm.
can you share that statistic again for the state
Yes.
testing and the, go ahead.
So it's kiddos who deep breathe all day, every day. So that means they're practicing deep breath throughout their day. So it's not just like one in the morning announcements and one in the evening announcements. They're actually getting the opportunity to deep breathe throughout the day. Those kiddos will achieve 11 to 17% higher on state standardized testing. And I have the original research on my live binder linked on there if you want to grab a hold of that. But
Thank
yeah,
you
it's
so
one of
much.
those things that is just so powerful and so easy, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time. I find that when we're if we put it into our routine, it just gets easier to do every time, right? It's like, well, we just sat down on the carpet, so we're going to take a deep breath. That's just what we do, right? I had a middle school teacher who was on bell schedule, and her kiddos, uh as they came in during, if it was like the in between the late bell and the regular bell, they had to do standing stretching. And then when the late bell rang, they had to sit down and stretch. And then she started every single class period with, let's take one in and out. All right, here's what we're going to do throughout the day. And she did that every class period. So it took just such a small amount of time that makes such a huge difference.
Thank you. I mean, I was just even thinking, like, from a teacher's standpoint, how much that could help them, simply get through the lesson plan on its own, like just being able to take, them for themselves a deep breath, but to know that it has, that much of an impact is great. I'm great to hear that. And I look forward to sharing that.
Yeah, it certainly helps us just as much. So anytime you're having kids deep breathe, we want to make sure that we're also deep breathing. It's not like a chance for us to do that extra 30-second little thing that we want to do. We want to be taking those deep breaths too, so that we stay in our human thinking brains as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we close out? All right. Thank you,
Sarah,
everyone.
Sarah, I
Oh,
can see you talking but I can't hear you. If you want to type it into the chat. It's like waiting for Jeopardy. What's the question going to be? Mhm. How do we help those kids that have been taught bone adaptive skills and they still don't use them? I hope that makes sense. Yes, it does make sense. So the thing about coping mechanisms is that it's just a whole mess. And even me, who literally teaches this and talks about this and practices this every single day of my life, there are many times that I'm pulling through Wendy's and getting a frosty instead of doing mindfulness or taking a deep breath. Right? I think that even when we know what we should be doing, sometimes it's easier to fall into those negative coping mechanisms. What's the best option for us is to start teaching kids as early as possible, because we learn our coping mechanisms from the people that we grow up around, right? It's not an accident that I reach for ice cream. So did my mom, right? This is what we do. But when that changes, this is what we do, changes into deep breathing and mindfulness, that it's the regular practice of it that begins to be where kids start almost muscle memory into that work. And just when I think about, like, oh, and you're starting to teach, or say, oh, good, in preschool, that's great. But it also takes, I don't know that anyone ever like gets like really good at it. I think that, we all find ourselves in that 8 to 10 spot at times. And we do and say things that we regret. And we, even though we've been learning and doing those things for a really long time, we still mess up. And so I think just recognizing that for me, doing this work isn't always going to make us better in the moment. It's not always going to make the student better in the moment, but I do find that it makes us better on the back end. Like, we can kind of like come back and be like, okay, so your wild animal brain was talking. So what, now I really want to know what was going on with you, to just be able to kind of process that afterwards. But just practice, practice, practice. Thank you, Sarah.
Any other questions before we close out? All right.
All
Thank
righty.
you, everyone. We'll
Have a
see you
great
in a
rest of
month.
your day. Thanks, Beth. We'll see you later.
Yeah, bye.